Welcome to the Brave Endurance Podcast with your host, Dr. James Kelly. Talking all things wellness, motivation, marketing, and life in general. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes to the Brave Endurance Podcast and check us out online at braveendurance.com. And now your host, Dr. James Kelly.
Good evening. Welcome to episode 13 of the Brave Endurance Podcast. This is your host, Dr. James Kelly. In continuance of Mental Health Awareness Month, today on the podcast I have Dr. Mitch Green. Dr. Mitch Green is a practicing sports psychologist, previously a clinical psychologist, though he does dabble in that a little bit on the side nowadays. Mitch works with numerous pro triathletes, college athletes, high school athletes, and has recently been named the sports psychologist for the USA Squash Developmental Team. Super cool. Mitch and I spent a great portion of the conversation talking about this idea of inner chatter. And for me, at least, I can tell you that I have some pretty strong inner chatter that can really wreak havoc when I'm racing, whatever that is. I always term myself, as a practicer, but not as a competitor because of that internal voice. And what Mitch allows and provides is some really great takeaways for you so that you can really listen to your own internal chatter and have some strategies to kind of deal with that. Moving beyond the whole idea of just being athletic, these strategies are really usable in a day-to-day world because we all have this internal dialogue that we have. We all chat with ourselves. We all talk negatively. And for some of us, we're really good at talking positively. But for a large majority of us, we talk fairly negatively. We also talk about confidence and what that means, and how I had one totally different meaning than Mitch and why Mitch doesn't focus on confidence whatsoever when he works with his clients. Next week on the podcast, I've got Mitch again. He's a glutton for punishment. He's coming back, as well as Seth Gillihan and Dave Yusko, the other two previous participants in the podcast. And we're going to talk about all things wellness, all things mental health, and we're going to kind of wrap this month up best we can. I think you're going to find that today's episode is really targeted to those of us who really struggle with the internal voice. So hopefully you get something out of that. Please leave a review on iTunes. Please subscribe to iTunes. Check me out on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and all the rest. Thanks, and I'll talk to you next week. All right, so one of the great things about podcasts is I can restart multiple times. Usually it takes me about 20 intros, so I'm happy with what I've actually done, which is ridiculous because it's a minute and a half thing. But again, Mitch, thanks for being here. Thanks for doing the podcast. As a precursor, as I had mentioned, I never really make these podcasts about Brave Endurance, but that's obviously the company that I do. And what's great about having you come in from a sports psychologist standpoint is to really talk about how exercise, whatever exercise it is, doesn't have to be running, but whatever exercise, it could be walking, really can help you be more productive and present at your job. And for an employee, and as you probably well know, there's a lot of money wasted by lack of productivity in a day. I could be equally included in that sometimes. But before we dive into that, it'd be great to learn a little bit about Mitch Green and kind of where you come from and some of your specialties that you focus in on.
Okay. Well, when it comes to the world of sports, when I really became interested in sports psychology was when I was in graduate school. I mean, I always identified myself as an athlete.
Where'd you go to grad school?
I went to Temple. I got my clinical PhD there in the 90s. And it was at that time that a guy named Chuck Knobloch was playing for the Yankees. I'm from New York. Although I was here in Philly, I was still tracking the New York sports scene.
Was that the guy who let the ground ball go through his legs, or was that
No, that was the Boston Red Sox.
Oh, that's right.
First baseman.
Yeah.
Although that was against the Mets, so I was a happy camper that day. I was up in Boston when that happened. A lot of unhappy people, but I was one of the happy people. Bill Buckner was his name.
That's right, Bill Buckner, yeah.
Chuck Knobloch was a star in the New York Yankees and with some of the other teams in the major leagues, but he all of a sudden developed this problem where he couldn't throw the ball straight and accurately from second to first. He was a second baseman.
Yeah.
And it became such a fascinating problem that this major league all-star couldn't throw the ball 15 feet without it going into the stands, without going into the dirt. And it was headline news in New York, of course, and I was struck by how it is that somebody could have such a mental block in sports and be so accomplished, yet not be able to do something that he did in his backyard as,
I remember
as
that
a kid.
now, yeah.
And what was interesting, Knobloch went from second. They eventually moved him to the outfield because it was just, he'd have to be less accurate throwing from the outfield. And within a couple of years, he was out of Major League Baseball. So that was my first time. I never heard of sports psychology at that point, but that was the first time I thought I was taking extra time away from my classwork to figure out and learn about what was going on with Knobloch. And then there are other players that are well known for having a similar problem with yips or with poor
I'm sorry, that
accuracy.
sounds like I need penicillin. What is yips?
Yips is a sort of where an athlete will not be fluid in their motion. It could be a golfer that just isn't swinging through the ball, but is taking their club back and then forward and then back and then forward, and it's kind of a hesitation in their normal natural motion. Some catchers have had it where they're about to throw, but they pull the ball back. They're about to throw, they pull the ball back.
It's like a hesitation almost.
A hesitation, a real mental block. And I don't know to this day anyone knows what happened with Knobloch as to why exactly. He apparently didn't seek out much in the way of sports psych consultation. Again, it wasn't as in vogue as it might be now.
Yeah.
But the point is, I always had that in the back of my mind, even when I just started my career as a clinical psychologist, because that was what my degree was in, that someday maybe I could find a way to tie this all together. And that happened about 7 or 8 years ago when I shifted gears from what I was doing as a clinician and really did a 180 to what I'm doing now, which is working mostly with athletes of all levels.
So what's been the biggest difference between what you did prior to kind of switching gears?
The work I was doing prior was a lot of work with kids on the autistic spectrum, and it was very rewarding work, very challenging work. By the end of the time that I was working with them, I was actually beginning to show my sports piece was coming alive, because I was taking these kids, some of them who were great sports fans, but nobody was picking them for the team. And there were no club sport teams that they could play on. And I got them out of the office, and I even did some sport-skilled summer camps for kids on the spectrum, where it was really effort-based and not performance-based. It wasn't how many baskets you can score, but we were just celebrating the idea that they were out there and that they could catch it, that they could share the ball, that they were paying attention to their teammates, because for these kids that was as valuable as scoring a basket. And that reached the point where we got them, I don't know if you've heard of dragon boating.
Yeah.
And my wife and I were competitive dragon boaters on a team called the Philadelphia River Runners. It was some of the running people we became friends with, formed a team. And I thought, this is a perfect sport for them, because you have to pay attention to the other paddlers, you have to be in sync. And for these kids on the autistic spectrum, paying attention to others isn't their strong suit, and being in sync isn't their strong suit. But maybe this would encourage it in a kind of a fun way. And so with a lot of help from a lot of people, I, for 2 years, had a team that we put together. We called them the Boys of Summer. It just turned out it happened to all be boys.
Yeah.
And they went out there on the water and competed in this festival, and their parents, I think, may have been happier than they were, just to see their kids being part of an inclusive group that practiced. They had uniforms that we got them. There was structure, and there was a goal. So it was really cool.
I would imagine for a lot of parents, to your point, just giving that sense of normality to their life is probably more powerful than anything else.
Yeah, we were very clear that this was for everyone, not just for the kids. Yeah. And that's why we wanted them to show up to practice wearing a practice uniform. And we took it kind of seriously in that respect. And I think the parents were amazed to see what their kids were capable of, where they often were seeing their kids bump up against things that they couldn't do and couldn't be involved with. Here they were, a team with a name and a coach and a mission. It was, I think I got more out of it than maybe anybody else did.
No, I can imagine. I mean, I over my history, have worked with kids, not only with autism, but
I've worked with kids teaching them how to swim, for pretty much my whole life.
Yeah.
And I think that, you can see the kids. I just learned, and I'm sure you guys know this even better than I, that anyone can do anything if the conditions are right. And anyone can do anything with the proper support, even when they're putting up the psychological barriers if I can't.
Yeah.
It's finding a way to say it differently to them for the cans.
Yes.
And in that capacity, I can imagine that it was just 10 times more challenging.
Yeah, but I think in many ways it's the same as if you were going into a corporation, in the sense that you have to create the right culture, and what's important has to be clear with everyone, what the priorities are here. And for this group, it wasn't about how fast we went down the water or how strong anybody was. It was like that we're all as strong, we're strong as a unit, and we're all going to give it our all. And that environment kept the kids around, kept them wanting to come to practice. And again, if we're talking about some of the corporate stuff, which we'll get into, I think it's the same kind of idea, which is the corporation may have a culture, but then if you're trying to start a certain exercise-related program, we have to be clear that people don't slip into, that everyone's clear about what the priority is and what the purpose is, not just what the goal is.
Sure.
But people we'll talk about this in relation to my own work, but people wind up overemphasizing the goal and lose sight of the purpose. And
I never actually thought about the difference between the two. So, to me, that would be such a rewarding exercise in terms of working with these children. So, where did the pivot come to where that becomes less of your focus and more to the athlete?
There was a time when the practice that I co-owned with a psychiatrist was ending, and it was a time where I had to sort of take stock. What we had been doing wasn't going to continue anymore, and it was just this pause button that I realized it was a time where I thought, if I keep going down this path, I think that this is going to continue to be my expertise, and I think I wanted to try something different. I felt like I wanted to learn new things.
How old were you when that transition happened?
I was in my mid-30s at that point, and had young children. And I had just a clear idea that kind of what I decided to do next, or whether I continue to decide to do it, this was kind of going to be my thing, I felt like, for the rest of my psychology career. Not that that's true, but that was the thought that I had. And I thought, now's the time where I can kind of reinvent myself. And I sought out consultation. I found sports psychologists in the area, and I sat across from them like I'm sitting from you, and I said, like, what do you do, and what is sports psychology? And I latched on to a couple of terrific people who took me under their wing and were willing to explain it to me. And the most important thing I learned is I didn't have to have this all happen overnight, that I could continue my clinical practice because I needed to continue to make an income. And slowly, though, make inroads into the sports psych world. And that's exactly what I did. I just slowly, went to conferences and slowly introduced myself to athletic directors or other coaches in the community, and began to sort of get a sense of that this is something that I could do. My clinical background, I thought, was perfect for doing the sport work. You're still dealing with people. You're still dealing with issues of confidence and worry and stress and pressure and expectations, which you could be working in the corporate world and have. You can be, anyone could experiences these things.
So do you remember when you I won't say landed, got your first actual athlete?
Yeah.
What was that was that like, I got it? Was it a moment of success, or did it snowball after that?
No. It didn't snowball after that. I kind of thought it would. I really did. I thought sort of that everything, once I got like maybe a bigger name athlete or a connection to a particular university or coach, at least in my way, it doesn't work like that. It's one of the lessons I learned, is to stay humble about all this sort of thing, that you don't just jump from one to the next. It's a lot of grinding it out and
You don't go from
making
like little Timmy
connection.
to Michael Jordan.
I have not.
Yeah.
I have not done that. I have not done that. I think I had a little bit of those, aspirations and dreams when I first started, but I think, I do think I'm more sort of been behind the scenes, sort of working with athletes who very privately and quietly come to me, and I've learned to manage my own expectations around all of this.
So, do you see a difference between, if I'm correct, you work with high school athletes as well as professional athletes on the spectrum. Do you see a difference between the two groups in terms of their drive? I don't know if it's a very obtuse question. I'm just trying to think, is there like a catch-all difference between someone who is an elite athlete and someone who is, I guess, someone who's not? It's like a mental thing, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I think that in certain ways, absolutely, there's a lot of differences. In certain ways, no. I mean, the assumption has been you're an elite athlete or a pro athlete, that you don't have bouts of doubt and loss of confidence and questions about whether you can do it or not, and that's false. They have as many questions about their own abilities. I'm not saying everybody, but
Sure.
many than people might expect, because we see them. They're so big. They're on TV. They're so powerful. So in many ways, they're not very different. They were the high school athlete who just got older, and, but some of the doubts that could come from childhood related things that could come from or some of the pressures that exist in their family, even though they're now elite, or may still be there. And so that's a common referral for me from even a pro, is they want to say, I'm actually still kind of scared. I'm still kind of worried. And I think that
Worried about what? Failure? Worried about
failure, not pleasing other people, not meeting expectations, being a disappointment. As you know, it's great sacrifice to reach a certain level, so they've sacrificed a lot. There could be parental pressure, and why don't you get a real job, or why don't you stop trying to make it on the PGA Tour when you're coming in, 50th out of 55, and is this really worth it? So those kinds of pressures, people need a place to talk about those, and so that I can relate to. A high school athlete will have his own or her own. I think the difference with the pros is, there's. I think one of the things you do get is this unbelievable drive that at that point that they have to win, and I love sitting across from somebody where you really get that this. That they are willing to do anything they can to win, and not every high school athlete obviously is kind of that I see as sort of having that same kind of level of drive. But
do you think that's like the elite athletes are predisposed for that drive versus, do you know what I mean? Like it's inherent.
I do think so.
Yeah.
I do think so. I think right. It doesn't just show up at that point. I think that's something that, because the sacrifices you have to make to get to that level along the way. If they went to college and went through college, they had to make lots of sacrifices to stay with their teams or train. And so the ones I see I appreciate just how important it is for them to win and to be on the podium or to come out successful. And you as a sports psychologist really need to get that. You can't sort of approach, say, well, isn't this just for fun? You would immediately not get someone not returning. You need to really bond with them around the idea that there's a very clear goal in mind. Whereas the high school athlete, there may be some clear goals in mind, but there may be other number of things happening besides just the desire to win.
Do you see a lot of athletes, you kind of allude to this, I'm just thinking of myself, so I played sports. I don't know. I started playing water polo in 6th, 7th grade. Played water polo through high school. Played in college. I don't play anymore because my skill set's not as robust as it used to be, so I don't enjoy it. But do you see a common theme between their family structure growing up and the difficulties they may have in terms of being successful, like confident? I think of myself, like I lack confidence. It's one of my big issues, right? So I'm not confident about a lot of different things, and I can see the direct connection to my childhood to now.
Yeah, I think if you're asking you're asking one question. Let me see if I can answer it slightly
Yeah, no, I
different way.
tend to ask really convoluted
That's
questions.
okay.
Yeah.
I think the first thing you made me think is that the trouble they may have with confidence on the field, I often shows up off the field as well, or out of the pool as well. So when I'm talking with someone, this is great that I'm a clinical as well as a sports psychologist. I'm interested in not just what shows up in the pool, but how they're getting through their life and where does confidence or lack thereof show up in their family life or in their friendships and relationships. And so when we're talking about these things, I'm interested in how much support or lack thereof they're getting from their family, which is a little different than what you're asking. I don't think that I could say clearly that certain patterns show up, that someone who has this sort of family structure.
That's what I'm asking. Yeah.
Because I think sometimes you see people who rise from the ashes. You think there's no reason for them to feel confident because they've been grown up in such brutal conditions, and here they have more confidence than anyone else. And then there are other people who you think how could you not have confidence? Like your parents have just been, or your people around you have been so supportive. I can think of a number of athletes like that, where they have but they still struggle with so much doubt and question. So it's not a one size fits all. It's not a very, very clear pattern, and that's what I enjoy about the work. I enjoy trying to figure out how it is they did get to where they are right now. Why is it that they are where they are, and not expect that just because they're a pro or an elite that they are that some of these basic issues of confidence aren't still important aspects of what we need to do together.
It would seem to me, those two examples of family support structure of a family, and then someone who rises from the ashes.
Yeah.
I think of the term resilience. Some people are much more resilient, and then the ones who, I don't want to use the word coddled, but were well supported, they were never really shown the failure side to know what that's like.
Yes, I think I do see that. I see when I have a number of college athletes who turn professional, and I happen to have a nice cadre of people I work with, and I really have gotten to see a number of them try to make the shift. And part of it is they're so used to winning and finishing at the top. And then when you turn professional, you really have to take a look at why it is you're doing this, because you're not going to win when you start out, especially. All of a sudden, you are the structure of the college team, where they tell you when breakfast is, they tell you when training is, everyone hits the gym together. You have none of that. You don't have that net anymore. You're really out there having to figure it out on your own. And whether everyone's been telling you how great you are, or they've been coddled perhaps, now these athletes are coming to me and they're asking themselves, like, how do I do this? How do I become my own? How do I deal with loss? How do I deal with frustration? Is this worth it? And how do I even set up my own life at this point? Now that I'm kind of on my own.
That's really interesting. All those different.
Very interesting. And in some sports, like triathlon, it's like a different sport in that you're no longer racing with, let's say, the amateurs who all go off together. Now you're in front, and there could be nobody in front of you. The next girl or guy on the bike might be, miles up the road. So where you're used to cycling and feeding off of the energy of your competitors, because you're all kind of starting together, or now you're out there on your own, and you have to figure out, how do I stay focused and motivated and confident when there doesn't seem to be much here to work off of. And so I often get a lot of referrals for these young pro athletes because it's a different game, And
you do a lot. If you were to break down the percentage of types of athletes, so sport-wise, is there a certain sport that you have a greater? Because I know you're very heavy in the triathlon community, and I know for some college sports, women athletes. But is there a certain segment you tend to specialize in mostly?
I would say mostly tennis, squash, and golf.
So are you the national squash coach or psychologist? Is that right?
Well,
no. Okay.
I am the sports psychologist to their development team, to the U.S. squash development team.
Okay.
Yeah, that was recently named. So that is right.
Okay.
And
I thought I heard that, but I wasn't sure.
It's a growing sport, and I was pleased to be part of it, and I have the opportunity to work with some of the upper echelon players and some of the upper echelon people in U.S. squash. So I happened to know nothing about squash before I wound up on the main line, and this is sort of the fun of it for me. Is all these years later now, I'm really proud that I have now seen hundreds and hundreds of squash players, and have kind of become an expert. And the beauty is, I don't have to be an expert in the game itself from the point of view. I'm not trying to talk to anybody about how to volley or how to hit a backhand. But I do understand what competition is like, and I do know how to zero in on where trouble will befall an athlete who isn't ready to compete. I often will say, these guys know how to play and these girls know how to play, but learning how to compete is what I teach. And that's the mindset, that the shift in mindset that a lot of these players have to hit. Not just the pros, but as you move up the ranks, you could be good and naturally gifted. But as you know, there reaches a point where everybody begins to be really good, and there's the point where then you could win, you could lose, and that's where the mindset is critical to success or failure. So that's where people give me a call.
So a lot of times, my children are 7'5". Annoyance at 22 months. No, he's awesome. And then obviously our newborn.
And congratulations.
Thank you.
As well.
You're more welcome to come over to the house and take a turn if you like.
My daughters, they're good babysitters.
We need some. Don't get me wrong.
Keep that in mind.
Yeah. Especially this summer. Is that I always tell Branson, and I always kind of feel like as a parent, you want to give your kids nuggets that they may not understand initially, but over time it rings true. So one of the nuggets I always tell Branson and Lucy, for that matter, who's the 5-year-old, is hard work beats talent when talent stops working hard.
That's right.
And so that's to that point of at some point, talent will stop mattering if psychologically they're not in the right space to move to the next level.
That's right.
And I don't even mean it with sports, in life in general. I try to use it as a life, but in sports specifically, you see a lot of that.
I see that. That's usually when the phone call comes in. Is they could be late middle school, it could be high school if I focus on that age. It could be the start of college where all of a sudden they stop. They're afraid to keep working hard because what if I don't win? And that's where these conversations about losing sight of the purpose of why you're competing. They're so focused on goals, and of course, how could you not be as an athlete, right? It's all about the numbers and the speed or the time, and so usually the first thing I do, just as when I'm working with someone, is to try to get clear that we need something more than just the win to be part of the game. We have to play a little bit of a different game here than just playing how to win, because that part of it is starting to build excess tension.
What does that look like when you say something other than the win?
Well, I sometimes give an example of, which may take a little too much time on the podcast, but it's sort of a funny story that I tell, and it's clear that it's a made-up story.
These podcasts are like strings. They just go as long as they need to go. Yeah.
Well, I do tell the story about my magical powers that I have occasionally bestowed on some of the players I see, the ones I like, of course.
Yeah.
And I will send them out there now that I've given them the magical power that I have, that they will win their next 4 tournaments. And I tell the story, how she looks at me funny, and I say, no, I'm not kidding, because I like you, I'm going to do this for you. And she goes out and plays her first tournament, and she goes through her regular preparation, and lo and behold, she wins. And she thinks, well, I won. Maybe I just, I won it today. I had a good day. She goes on and wins her second tournament, and she thinks, boy, I don't know. Could be Mitch. I don't know. I'm on a roll. And by the third tournament, she says, you know what? Forget it. I'm going to just stay up late, not, going to just sort of eat pizza the night before and stay up late. I'm not going to kind of get into that regular routine and ritual I do. And she gets up, 20 minutes, later than she normally would, and rushes over to the courts, let's say, and goes and plays that next tournament. And she can't believe it that she's won again. And I say to the client across from me, I said, you know what? Actually, then I get a text, and she says to me, I need to talk to you. Something's wrong. And she comes in to see me. And I said, what? Is there a high five coming here? Is there some sort of thank you want to give to me? She goes, there's something wrong. I go, well, what is it? What's the matter? You're winning. She goes, yeah, but something's missing. And then I will talk to the athlete across from me and say, kind of, what do you think's missing for her at this point? And that's when they'll start to think a little bit like, I guess, the challenge or the the uncertainty of it, and that's when we can begin to have a conversation about. So there, it seems to me, even when the victories are here, there's something else that is driving you as an athlete, but you've kind of lost sight of that because you're so over-focused and over-concerned about whether you're going to win or lose. And so that leads me to have this conversation about kind of why they're out there, and then getting them to see that it may be about more than just that. And if I can get them excited about the challenge, if I can get them excited about even embracing the sort of uncertainty of it all, and getting them to see that we're going to kind of focus over here in our work together, that's usually where I'll get the conversation started about the different game that we're playing. The goal is always to win. I say to them, that's boring to me. If I went to your next tournament and I had all the players lined up before they started and say, okay, how many of you guys want to win? I'd say, how many would raise their hand? She says, all of them. If I went to the next triathlon, how many of you want a PR today?
Yeah.
Everyone. So I say, you know what? There's nothing special about it. I say, I want to do something special with you here.
Yeah.
I want to figure out how to do that, how to get into the position to win. How can we do that? And part of doing that is by actually detaching from that for a period of time and spending a little bit more time over here. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's more about the process, not the result.
More about the process, more about the chase, more about the allowing. So this is where confidence questions come in, because I happen to be one that thinks confidence is overrated. And they look at me, or like you're looking at me right now, and because everyone tells them that they need to be more confident, and I'm not against people being confident.
I guess, what does that mean?
Yeah, and people are usually confident like after they really need it. In other words, after you play a great game, then you're confident, and you should be. But what do you do when you're not feeling confident? And often people go, like, that's the problem. I go, and just trying to make yourself feel confident, as far as I'm concerned, is like trying to make yourself taller. It just doesn't work. In other words, so a lot of the athletes will come see me and they're trying to tell themselves how great they are, how good they are, but it doesn't feel authentic. It doesn't feel true. It feels like they're trying to trick themselves.
Is that attributed to an underlying issue then, I would imagine?
Well, it's not always an issue. It comes to what I teach is understanding the role of what I call the mind chatter. Some people call it self-talk, and understanding that your problem isn't confidence. Your problem is that you're afraid of what your chatter is saying to you, and you're taking every word that your chatter says as gospel, because if your chatter says you may not be able to do this, you take that and think, I can't do this. And what I teach is I really see myself as an instructor, and we have a big whiteboard in my office where I'll pull it out and I'll do some teaching and have them take notes about how to allow that chatter to come, to understand why we have chatter, understand that every athlete has chatter, whether you're LeBron James or whether you're just starting out. And I give as many examples as I can from pro or Olympic athletes and videos and quotes to have them see. And that the goal isn't to necessarily try to be more confident. When I hear people want to be more confident, I hear they don't know what to do with the chatter. They're fighting with themselves about it. So there's a what I teach is sort of an acceptance-based, an allowing of the chatter, not fighting with it, not giving it more importance than it deserves, understanding that when you wake up the morning of your triathlon, that your first couple of thoughts are going to be, this was a stupid idea. I'm getting in a water at 7 a.m. I'm like, I hate swimming. And getting them to appreciate a little bit with the sense of humor, like you just smiled with, how predictable our chatter is, how predictable the doubts are, how they often will not show up in a practice pool session necessarily or a cycling session with your friends, but they show up right when you need them the least. And I get them to see the predictableness, how scripted they are. And all of a sudden then, instead of mind chatter kind of running the show, I get them to feel a little bit more like they see it coming, and we sort of teach different ways to handle it and manage it, and then how to kind of shift our focus to something else. Instead, what happens often is people try to feel confident, or try not to worry, or think they're supposed to be feeling something other than what they are feeling. and then they go down this slippery slope of trying to get more confident or trying to be more comfortable, and then they might find themselves frustrated and distracted. So by the time they're playing their sport, they spent so much mental energy trying to get their head together, and that's where I get a lot of people go, yeah, oh God, yeah. So that's how I kind of come at these questions of confidence and
no, I think that's fascinating because for me, I'm a practice guy. So my wife, she practices, but she's a racer,
mm-hmm.
and I tend to do negative self-talk when I race. Something starts to hurt or whatever, and it just takes over, and it totally implodes the effort I'm trying to do. But you put me in a practice, I'll crush the practice.
Yeah.
Because I'm not thinking about the pain, or I'm not thinking about, the end result of...
Or what's at stake.
Yeah, like in a triathlon, I mean, for those of you who have not done one, it can be very painful from start to finish if you really are pushing yourself at a high level. And so, I find that mentally, I start thinking about, well, I got to get to the end, right? So if I kill myself here, I'm not going to be able to do that, the run or the bike or whatever it is,
Right.
So it's an interesting... I always alluded to lack of confidence of being able to finish the race versus almost ignoring or accepting or dealing with the chat. I don't know if ignoring is the right word, but acknowledging and moving on.
Yeah, expecting it.
Yeah.
Not being caught by surprise when it shows up, and that's what happens sometimes. People don't expect it, and then they go, "Oh my God, this must mean it's not my day today," and then they mentally shut down and
start making excuses. I imagine
making excuses, and then they feel miserable after they finish because they could have pushed. The mind will always quit before the body needs to, and so.
I bet that's a huge difference between elite athletes and amateurs. It's just that in that word, the mind pushing that mind further than in line with the body.
Yeah, but they have to they have to be good at managing it. Jesse Thomas, who is a pro triathlete I have worked with, and he's out of Oregon, and if those of you who are listening want to get a feel for someone who's a pro who still has all this chatter, you should read some of his race reports, because he will, in a very humorous way, he's gotten to the point where he will talk about climbing hills and think only an alien couldn't be terrified of that hill or not be negative about the climb that he's about to make. And he goes into great detail how his mind is all over the place and telling himself he can't do it, and then trying to encourage himself that he can do it. And what's great about what he does is he's aware that that's part of racing. He doesn't think that he has to be this robotic killer who just has the killer attitude all the time, and if he's not a killer, then he's a wimp. Mm-hmm. He's far from a wimp. He's quite successful. So to me, mental toughness gets talked about a lot, and people do think that it's you are confident and you are always confident and you don't have any doubts. And there are people like that. I mean, there are absolutely competitors who are so steely-eyed, but most aren't, and most have to learn a way, not necessarily with a sports psychologist, but learn a way to kind of tune it out or acknowledge it or accept it or learn how to refocus on something else.
Do you find it's harder to work with athletes later in their career because of the depth and constant reinforcement of whatever they're dealing with?
I think that's a good question. I think about the athletes later in the career, I think it is very hard it is challenging. They feel like there's just one more additional pressures, which is they're up against Father Time, and they feel like if it's not now, it will maybe be never. And so getting them around on the court or out in a race and kind of having their mind clear and focusing on the process is more challenging, because not because of just what you said, but I think because they feel like they have to maybe they were formerly very good. I'm thinking of one person in particular. Now they have just a couple of years left to prove it again, and they're scared. Mm-hmm. They really are. They're really scared that they might not be able to prove it.
It must be tough getting them to accept the fact that if they don't, so what? Does it define who they are? That's the big thing. Does that failure define you?
Yes, and getting them to see that they get to choose the level of importance they give to that. And races don't have any meaning unto themselves. A triathlon doesn't have any meaning. A golf match doesn't have any meaning except for what it is we we put onto it, and getting them to see that they have choice about that, along the lines of what you said, can hopefully free them up from this idea that they have to and must and should perform a certain way. Those are killers when it comes to an athlete. If you feel like too much like you have to or you should, when I hear that language in my office, we get right into that, because it's that kind of sentiment that it can be motivating at one level, but for many there's a tipping point where if we take tennis, proving myself in the first set and I lose 6-3, if that's all you have going for you going into the match is like, I have to, and then come the second set, they're done, because they haven't proven it. They're probably not going to work out for them.
Do you think that's one of the reasons, like someone like Roger Federer, who's had a career that's far surpassed many in his age bracket, is able to do it because he just takes it as the totality and in the moment at the same time? Like, I don't have to win this point. I have to win. I mean, I'm sure in set 5, tiebreaker, I've got to win this point. But overall, he takes. And you obviously can't speculate for it, but I'm just.
No, but I certainly can't. But from what I read about Federer, the sense I get at least is that he doesn't puff himself up as much as everybody else has puffed him up, and I don't get the sense that he spends a lot of time thinking about how many championships he's won. I think he's humble, it seems to me, and he knows in any match it could go any way, and lots of them have gone his way. And when he loses, clearly he gets frustrated, he switches coaches. But I think one of the unique characteristics it seems to that he has, I don't know, is he doesn't make himself, he's very humble and doesn't see himself bigger than the game or the way everybody else sees him. He knows any match can go any way, any day, and that he needs to continue to work hard.
That's probably why he's such a crowd favorite too, is that humility that he tends to exude when he's out there.
I agree.
So through this initial conversation, one of the things that I always try to define in my head, and I'm sure you see this with individuals, whether athletes or not, is how do you define reason versus excuse? This is the reason why I failed. This is an excuse. Is there a difference to you?
Probably not. I tend not to care too much about how they're going to label that. Do you have a specific example you're thinking about?
I just think, like, in my mind,
they're all justifications in my mind.
Yeah, but are some really justifiable and some not?
Maybe, sure. I could imagine examples of that. But what I look for in this is there a lack of acceptance of what is so. In other words, to me, with the way I think, it's a lack of being able to accept the result is more interesting to me than whether it's a good excuse or not. If your chain falls off in the middle of a race or your tire blows out, then I think we could all see that it makes sense that you weren't able to finish where you wanted to finish.
But if someone says, in every race they do, using triathlons as an example, I was really fatigued that first mile, or I was really fatigued the first 2.5 miles, and that's every race, where every single practice they do, they never have that issue, right? So in their mind, they've created a reason to almost fail, or an excuse to fail, and that's where I'm trying to find that delineation between a real excuse, chain falls off, tire blows, you cramped up this one race, whatever, versus a consistent excuse or reason to excuse failure or accept failure.
Yeah. I think I see where you're going with that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I want to hear what it is they have to say, but if I'm working with them, I want to know whether, in other words, if I'm working with them, we need to always have a plan B. So if you're really tired on your first mile, I need to know, did our work together lead you to make a shift in your thinking? So if they just tell me that they were exhausted and then they feel like they couldn't continue, then I would say...
And it's a consistent theme. It's not like it's a one-off theme. That's kind of what I'm going at, is it's a duration of 10 races, or it's the same thing.
Well, again, I'm going to answer your question with a question. I mean, I would want to know, well, what's their question for me? What is it that they want to know from me? So they say, I'm consistently tired the first mile of every race, and I go, okay... so what is it that you're hoping for? What is it you're looking for? What have you tried? So I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but I don't know if I get.
I guess what
always-
I'm looking for is there a difference between excuse and reason? And in your mind, they're really one and the same.
They're one and the same. They're all justifications. They're all. I'm interested. Is he not accepting or she not accepting what has happened? What is actually so? Are they following whatever the plan is that we're working for?
So the key is the accepting part. I think that's what I hear is,
Yeah.
can you accept whatever reason or excuse and move on from it and strategize with it? And
Yeah, and that's the difference between some athletes and the others, the ones who get stuck in justifications and lack of acceptance, and others who are looking to work on that and figure out how the next time, to have one less thing that they can justify or have an excuse for.
so to shift gears, I just looked down. We've been talking for 45 minutes. So
Wow.
yeah, these
Okay.
go fast. I'm telling
Yeah.
you. So, what I'd love to know is do you know? Tell me some of the outcomes of exercise, right? So, what are some of the outcomes that, in terms of why exercise is important for an individual?
Well, I could always, it's always good to speak personally first. So for me, like I'm sure for you and many of the listeners, it doesn't solve my problems, exercise, but it always gives me great perspective for me to be continuing to work out or train or compete. And so I get the release of the endorphins. I get perhaps the social component because I'm not in my office or someone's not in their cubicle. I get to talk about something other than work. So speaking personally, I couldn't imagine my life, without it. So I think the benefits sometimes are obvious. The energy increase, sometimes the slowing down of the metabolism, the endorphin release, and
Is it speeding up or slowing down the metabolism?
I mean the speeding up.
Okay.
I apologize.
Yeah,
speeding
yeah.
up of the metabolism. Speeding up of the metabolism.
I was like, I
Don't
need to
get
stop
me wrong.
working out.
No,
I gotta stop working
right.
out then.
Everybody stop training right now. The speeding up of the metabolism, and then the lift in one's mood. Yeah. And so, I think the harder part for people is how to be consistent with it. I think everybody understands, who's even tried to get out there and exercise, is what the benefits are, and we only have to all have the same 24 hours in a day. And it is hard for people to make it a priority. It is, they have so many other worries and priorities and fears that something may not work out for them if they don't work out. if they go choose to work out, that something else might not work out for them. And so they're constantly trying to weigh all of those variables. And but the only way to sort of get something is being willing to give something up. And for some people, that's very hard to do because they very much hits a button for them that if I don't do X or if I don't do Y, like the whole house is gonna tumble. And sometimes you have to work through that with people to sort of talk about their chatter, their fears, and getting them to see is that just because it's a fear, does that really mean it's going to happen?
So let's talk about some strategies. And let's say that I am Tom. Sorry, Tom, if you listen to this, because I know who you are. But let's say I'm Tom, and I'm doing X, Y, and Z, but I have this fear of working out because I need to be committed to something. Like, that's probably a really awful example. Let me rephrase that. Let's just say I'm Tim. Switch off Tom. And what are some strategies that you would try to give someone to help with the chatter? In terms of, and you're talking about someone who needs to be active for all sorts of reasons, whether it's mental, physical, emotional. But there's clearly, I know there's probably tons of questions you'd want to ask before.
Yeah.
But there's got to be some general strategies that you
Sure.
would want to give some
Sure,
people.
you're right. And just quickly, I want to make sure that Tim is clear whether this is his decision or someone else's decision to exercise. Is it like, is there, she wants you to, or your doctor says so? But of course, if you don't start there, then you're.
And why is that important? I think that's really important. I talk about that a lot, but why is that important?
Well, because I want to make sure that we're not starting this process in like a one-down position. In other words, that he's already feeling like obligated about this, because there's not a lot of fun in doing things for obligation purposes. And so, and there's a lot of sense of control, or that you have to trying to please somebody else, or this is someone else's agenda. It's hard to enjoy life and have satisfaction when you're doing someone else's bidding. And so I would want to clarify first: is this something really he wants to do? Or is he doing this just to please somebody else? And if so, why? And then, of course, why is it that it's been hard for him to do that? So that is.
So you're talking about intrinsic versus extrinsic, being motivated.
Yeah, and that's why in the sort of the corporation model and some of the things that you guys are doing, those are, to me, are important questions, because are you doing it because your coworkers do it? Are you doing it because you want to look good in the eyes of? I call them side games. I don't want to if I take you too far off where we are, but people find it kind of interesting. It's these. So if the game is to sort of quote unquote is to be in a training program or to be a tennis player, and play well on the court, we play these additional games that I call side games. These are like these additional agendas that go on other than the actual stated agenda, which is like to try to win the tennis match. Like, for example, trying to prove something to someone, trying to not be embarrassed, trying to look good, trying to get a scholarship for those athletes that I work with, trying to get recruited, trying to please my parents, my spouse. So I do spend a lot of time on the front end trying to figure out how many games are we playing. And so when you step into the gym, or a couch to 5K, are we just clear what game is being played here? Is this about you, or is this about some other additional effort to try to prove something to someone? And that's where I, as the sports psychologist, would start, because there's nothing wrong at times with trying to prove some things to people, because sometimes that is a little bit of a motivator.
So what if it is that, though? What if it's not the intrinsic? Because that's one of the big debates that go on, that goes on in corporate wellness, is who's driving that bus. So there's a whole survey that's like readiness to change. So finding people who are ready to change, well, they're much easier to actually change than those who are not. So, so if someone who's not ready to change but feels that pressure, are they a lost cause, or do you have to try to figure out what might be their intrinsic trigger to want to do it?
Yeah, I'm not sure I get the terminology, not ready to change, but I could never look at somebody in that way. The way my mind works is I would be thinking, yeah, what's getting in the way? Everybody seems to me is ready to change. I mean, everybody. It makes it sound like they're.
That's how you make your money.
It makes it sound like they're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want them to feel like they're doing something wrong, but what is it that's sort of getting in the way of it? Yes, and finding what it is for them, and it could be something deeply personal. It could be some deep-seated fear. It could, and of course, a lot of it is not being able to see themselves as somebody who can actually accomplish that the way she could or he can. They don't identify themselves as somebody like that. So. Your initial question, though, was about the chatter and some of the. No, that's okay.
This is so how I do this. I have a great idea.
Well, that's okay. Well, this is like a session where I need to kind of make sure we're kind of bringing it back to where we started. So when I talk about the chatter, I just first get them to be able to say to me, like, what is their chatter saying to them before when they find out about the Couch to 5K email that just came. What does their chatter say? And I want them to be able to share with me that voice, that conversation with themselves that they're having at the time or through the night that's keeping them up at night. And I want them to see that this is sort of what their chatter does. It finds reasons, as along the lines of what you're saying, for them. It's a protective device. The chatter doesn't want them to kind of get out of their comfort zone. The chatter is, in many ways, goes on duty to protect them. It doesn't want them to look bad. It doesn't want them to embarrass themselves. And it doesn't want them to not meet expectations. That's the chatter's job, is how I talk about it with them. That's what it's doing for you. It's keeping you safe in that respect. And there could be a whole conversation about safety and yet I'll sometimes say to them, but here you are talking to me about wanting to do the Couch to 5K program.
Well, I think you have to define safe there, too. Safe how?
It could be a number of ways. Yeah. Well, physically safe is one thing. Is the chatter is good at that? Like, it makes you look both ways. before you cross the street so you don't get creamed, but it also psychologically safe in this way, in terms of how you feel as though you might look or appear in the eyes of others. And but I may say to them, isn't it interesting though? Here you are here to talk to me about how you could figure out how to do the Couch to 5K program. So there must be something else going on here. Mm-hmm. If you were just all chatter, you wouldn't even really be here right now. You would have deleted that email when you got it. And they acknowledge that, and I begin, let's talk about, so there's your chatter. I kind of try to embody these things. So here's your chatter and here's you. And the idea is we want to make room for the chatter. What often people come in is they think they have to get rid of it. And they're, like we were talking about confidence before, that it shouldn't be there. My approach is very different. It is more of an Eastern approach, more of an acceptance-based approach, which is that once I teach them about it and understand that we don't have to be afraid of it and we can allow it and give some room for it, if it will let you be. If you let it be, it will let you be. So what you resist persists is one of the sayings from the East, and what you will let be will let you be. So I begin to have this conversation with them about their chatter and get them to have a different relationship to the chatter. One that is more of an acceptance, one more less afraid of it. We understand what the MO is of the chatter.
So when you talk about that, like more acceptance,
yeah.
In my mind, I'm thinking, so like when I'm racing and I say, well, I'm going to be exhausted, my legs are tired.
Yeah.
Do I then say, yep, so what?
You say thanks for sharing, chatter, right on cue, because you are starting to feel tired. And so your chatter is just sort of reflecting back how it is you're feeling. But then you get to choose whether that is a sign of like, it's time to shut it down, which is what your chatter wants you to do. Because remember, it's trying to protect you. Mm-hmm. It doesn't want you to look bad or get hurt or blow up. So we prepare for those very moments at mile, X of the run, where your chatter will start to pipe in, and then we come through a game plan. But your game plan may be different than hers in terms of what's our plan, in terms of how we want to. But the first step, you're right, is the most important, which is to go, yep, I hear you, got it, thank you, yes, boom, and then now where do we need to focus? Accepting that it's part of racing, it's part of competing. Not a sign of this isn't your day, James. So just shut it down. And you talked about practice, and that's where practice is critical. I mean, it's a whole other session here, but just talking about how to use practice to practice the chatter and how to respond to it. So, for example, you and Mary would know this from track workouts or swim sessions that you guys conduct, that you are pushed to a certain level and you don't think you can do another 400 or another 50 in the pool. And I don't want people just to gut those out. I want them to be very consciously talking themselves and noticing how the chatter will show up for them, because at some point it shows up for everyone, even in practice if you're pushed sort of far enough.
So taking that, moving back to the organization, so that's when you're talking to groups of individuals. It's basically having this very general conversation around, listen, many of you are going to have negative thoughts around doing this because of fears of why you can't succeed. Whether it's because you're afraid you're going to hurt yourself, whether you've never done it before. And it's really, the conversation ends up being more about that's okay to have those. It's what you do with them is what counts.
Yes, absolutely. And giving everybody the space and hopefully feeling safe enough that they could share it, because some of them may be very deep-seated. And I've had, men and women talk to me in tears, about not seeing themselves as an athlete, or their husband not thinking this is the stupidest idea, that they would take this time to train for some 5K. I mean, like taking time away from the family. And if you don't handle that, then the training program could be worthwess. Mm-hmm.
So what are
try to handle that?
Yeah. It's tough.
It's not a yes. It's not as if you just do it and it's over. Yeah. I wish it was. It's not that easy, but make an effort to handle it.
Yeah, it sounds like your families are very much like this. But some families are very supportive. Some Mary's very supportive of me getting activity, and vice versa. And even with 4 kids, we know that it's critical for my sanity.
Absolutely.
Because I become a raging a-hole if I don't do something, and she knows it.
Does your wife, like my wife, does send you out on runs or exercise?
Go for a walk or
something. I mean, to say you
just
need
get
to
out.
go.
Yeah. No, I get that. I get that often, especially if it's I used to. With our dog Hamish, who she dearly loves to hate, I used to go on a lot of walks with him in the morning. It was my thing. Before Miles, probably, our third child, I would go on a walk in the morning for about an hour and a walk in the afternoon.
Wow, yeah.
You know, and I was very lucky to have that space because that was my decompression time. That was my time to listen to my podcast, to kind of get a sense of what's going on. And I think that when we're talking about organizations and instituting activities, I think sometimes one of the things that's lacking is not only the institutional support, but the family support.
Yeah.
And it would seem to me that every individual is going to have a different set of circumstances.
Yeah, and you can't be all things to everyone. I get that. And so it's not as if you're going to be able to capture everybody and get a full 100%, I'm imagining, participation in a number of these. But absolutely that behind
It'd be great, but no, you're right, yeah.
No, realistically in anything. But I do think, yes, and I personally, my wife did an Ironman, I did an Ironman, and it wasn't happening with 3 kids if we weren't making room and space and understanding how important it is.
Which, by the way, that's the loneliest training you can do.
Very lonely at times. Very lonely at times.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I know that Mary has many athletes who do. She has athletes who do Ironman, and I haven't yet to do one. And I said I was going to do one at 40, but then we had our 4th this year, which I'm 40 this year, and it's not the right time to do one. Mm-hmm. But I also can't imagine being on my bike for 4.5, 5 hours straight just for a training session.
Yes, and for those of us who aren't as probably fast a biker as you, it's even longer. It's I'm talking about a mental game.
Yeah, I know, right?
It is as much mental as it is physical, for sure.
One of the things I ask all my podcast guests is, how do you define wellness?
That's a good question. Oh.
And I try. So usually I get the paragraph first, and then I'm like, "Can you try to be succinct? See if you can do it in a sentence or two."
Well, I guess the first thing I think of wellness, I think of mental wellness is the first thing. Not surprisingly, I think of, and I think about the self-acceptance. I feel like I don't just talk the talk. I try to walk the walk. I think about wellness being. I think about my children when I think about when you said wellness. I immediately thought of my kids, and I thought what would wellness look for them, and I think of them being able to accept their weaknesses and being able to celebrate their strengths, and I don't know, it may sound a little hokey, but I think about them doing that with other people as well. I guess I don't just think about it in that solo way, but I think about offering that to other people, that they are the kind of people that will accept others for who they are, and find pleasure and joy in what other people are able to succeed. So I think of it in the not fighting with oneself way, as to me, my vision of wellness, when we're at our happiest is when we can just allow ourselves to be, and just so I may be giving you more of a paragraph, but that's maybe in a nutshell. That's really in a nutshell. Hard. But I think of it as more of the self-acceptance perhaps than anything else.
This sounds like in that definition it's more about balance, meaning accept the good and the bad, and accept the good and the bad in others.
Yes.
Yes. It's a very Eastern, very Eastern.
Well, you can see from today, that's kind of how the training has sort of been, what I've been attracted to, and other people are mentors of mine, and so I come from more of that tradition than like Seth's tradition, which is cognitive behavioral. Not that I don't use some of it, but that there's rational and irrational ways to sort of look at things. I kind of consider any thought, all the mind chatter thought, are all legitimate thoughts. They're all, and that I don't necessarily try to get them to change them as much as allow them and not fight with them. So it is more Eastern in that respect.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, Mitch, I really appreciate your time. I ate up a good hour and 4 minutes of yours. So
it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I'll see you in 2 weeks.
I will see you with the guys.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
This has been a Brave Endurance podcast by Dr. James Kelly. Thank you to our guests and to everyone listening. Please subscribe on iTunes and be sure to check us out online at braveendurance.com.